Okay, here is your YouTube review for chapter 18, the heart. Thought I'd do a blank paper review for this chapter. I mentioned the areas of study are pretty discrete and I think manageable, and they are as follows. I would certainly glance over the PowerPoint, anything I post on Moodle, any reviews, any old worksheets for minutia and other minor questions which might be asked that this review might not cover. Did I cover all my bases there? So the areas of study are the diagram, the circuit, the valves, location and function, EKG or ECG, the heart sounds, and what causes them and leads to them, and cardiac output. So I will try to address these one at a time. Alright, the diagram. I don't want to spend too much time here on the diagram. You have several diagrams to review. There's a coloring sheet that we did that will show a same view. There's also a worksheet we did on Monday in class, which is similar. You know, the one thing of note is don't confuse right and left. Recall that on the heart, that anatomically speaking, this is the right side and this is the left side. And contrasting the pulmonary arteries and veins is another point you want to be careful about. The pulmonary veins come in pairs on both sides of the heart. I should make them red. They're oxygenated. And so these would be the left pulmonary veins. And here, okay, those are the left, and these would be the right pulmonary veins. Whereas the pulmonary arteries are singular. This one exits, actually as the trunk exits the right ventricle, and then we split into the arteries. So this would indicate the left pulmonary artery, and this would indicate the right pulmonary artery. I would hope the chambers and the valves then are not overly difficult. Again, I would refer to the different sheets that I mentioned here. Okay, next topic, circuit. I'm going to do this a little bit differently. If you recall, we have 3 sets of 4s that we have to recall or remember. That will be the right atrium, the right ventricle, the left atrium, and the left ventricle. You have 4 valves associated with these chambers. You have the tricuspid valve, the bicuspid valve, the aortic semilunar valve, and the pulmonary, excuse my handwriting, valve. You have 4 sets of blood vessels you're responsible for. Pulmonary arteries, the pulmonary veins, the aorta, the superior and inferior vena cavae. Being that this is a circuit, we can pretty much start anywhere. I will start in the right atrium. before we get to the right ventricle, is a valve separating each atrium from each ventricle. We're on the right side, which contains the letter R. So we're going to associate that with the tricuspid valve. From through here, we pass to the right ventricle. Exiting the ventricle into a blood vessel, again, we need a valve. We're on the right side of the heart, so this is the pulmonary circuit. So we're on our way to the lungs, so we need the pulmonary semilunar valve. The blood vessels that we're entering, since we're on our way to the lungs but we're leaving the heart, must be arteries away. So that makes this 5. The pulmonary arteries lead to the lungs, which I don't have indicated here. Specifically the capillary beds in the lungs where the actual gas exchange takes place. Once oxygen has been picked up by the blood, there's not enough pressure here to move and deliver the oxygen to the rest of the tissues in the body, so we need to return to the heart. We're going to return via veins, since arteries are away and veins are 2. We're going to enter the left side of the heart now, the left atrium. We're going to make our way through the bicuspid valve into the left ventricle, and we're going to exit via the aortic semilunar valve into the aorta. The aorta will branch into arteries. Those arteries will branch into arterioles. Those arterioles will branch into capillaries for every organ of your body. The oxygen will be delivered. Carbon dioxide is picked up by the blood, which makes its way into venules. Those venules combine to form veins. Those veins eventually all combine into the... What number are we on? Oh, well, you know what? With all that verbiage, and I didn't write any of it down, eventually this leads into your systemic circulation or your capillary beds. So let's refer to that as number 13. Again, once the oxygen is delivered in the capillaries, we make our way back via veins, which combine eventually into the very large superior and inferior vena cava, which go back to leads us back to the right atrium. The other note I wanted to make here is that the arteries that leave the heart and carry blood away from it are traditionally colored in red, the left side of the heart. The blood on this side is full of oxygen. The one example of a vein that is also red would be the pulmonary veins. The pulmonary veins are considered an exception, as veins are not usually oxygenated and indicated in red. Now traditionally veins are low in oxygen, and that's the right side of the heart, which contains deoxygenated blood. The one exception there would be the pulmonary arteries, in terms of that, the exception being that arteries usually, like the aorta, are red and full of oxygen. Pulmonary arteries are not. They're low in oxygen. So maybe I'll jot this down here. So most veins are blue, but not the pulmonary veins. And most arteries are red, but not the pulmonary arteries. So that's your circuit. The valves, we have 2 sets of valves, the AV valves. The purpose of the tricuspid and bicuspid valves is to prevent backflow of blood into the atria. The AV valves are the ones with the chordae tendineae, otherwise known as the heartstrings, which are anchored by the papillary muscles. The chordae tendineae again prevent the reverse blow up of the valves into the atria, which would lead to that backflow that we don't want. So when they shut, the chordae tendineae pull tight and prevent them from reversing their position into the atria. Keep them pointed in the right direction. Your other valves are your semilunar valves, and they prevent backflow of blood from the greater blood vessels back into the ventricles. These do not have chordae tendineae. They close by the process of gravity. Recall that defects in the valves in which there is some backup of blood leads to heart murmurs, which are detectable with a stethoscope usually. And that's your valves. Okay, the EKG. Okay, I've indicated two cycles here. You should be able to label an EKG graph. So this is my P wave, this is my QRS complex, and this is my T wave, and here is the next cycle. The P wave is the signal for atrial systole or contraction, and that signal is derived from the pacemaker potential at the SA node. The QRS complex is a signal for ventricular systole. At the same time, again, we said masked by this this large complex is atrial diastole is occurring behind this, so to speak, large peak. The T wave is the signal for ventricular relaxation or diastole. And there you have it. The actual, you should note certainly that I use the word signal here specifically. The actual contraction of heart muscle is going to occur immediately following the signal for that event. So, for example, in class, the one example from the worksheet we had, we were bracketing ventricular diastole. So, if we wanted to, I believe that was in blue. So, when are the ventricles relaxed? Beginning right after the signal for relaxation until the actual contraction, which would be up until about this point here. I don't want to mark up all these, but you should be able to bracket really all these examples. I mean, I'll do one more. Let's do one more. Let's do atrial systole. Let's bracket atrial systole. So the actual contraction of the atria will begin immediately following the signal. And recall that atrial diastole occurs during the QRS complex. So I would put atrial systole right about there. Along with the actual graph, recall some of the information from the PowerPoint. I mentioned the SA node as the pacemaker potential, which is your bass drummer for your heartbeat and runs at about 75 beats per minute, or depolarizes at about that rate. The AV node is our backup drummer, and if something happens to the SA node, would continue the heartbeat but at a reduced rate. The signal from the AV node is carried to the ventricles via the bundle of His. I guess that was the other mention I wanted here is depolarization versus repolarization. Depolarization is equivalent to the signal for systole or contraction, and repolarization is equivalent to diastole or relaxation. And that's your EKG. Which brings us to heart sounds. A lub and a dup. The sounds are due to the closing of the valves. The lub sound is due to the closing of the AV valves. We mentioned there's actually 4 heart sounds. So if you listen carefully, you can hear them. But other than that, we should link the sounds as a set to the closing of both AV valves and both semilunar valves. As to when the lub sounds, when and why do those AV valves close? This is due to an increase in ventricular pressure. As the ventricles fill with blood, eventually there's a signal for the ventricles to contract. As that pressure increases, that slams shut the AV valves. And that's the first sound. At this point in time, the semilunar valves are still closed. Pressure continues to build and eventually ejects. In between these two sounds, you would have the ejection of blood out of the ventricles. Due to the continued increased pressure, which forces open the semilunar valves. As the ventricle then begins to relax, the pressure in the ventricle is reduced. This, in essence, sucks in the doors, which are the semilunar valves, and closes these valves. So this is due to a decrease in ventricular pressure. Which prevents that blood from backing up from the aorta and the pulmonary arteries into the left and right ventricles, respectively. This increase in ventricular pressure marks systole, or ventricular contraction. And the reduction in pressure marks the event called diastole, or ventricular relaxation. And that covers your valves, which leaves us with a little math, which is not too bad. cardiac output, you should know the equation. Cardiac output is the amount of blood your heart ejects or moves in 1 minute. Your heart rate is measured in beats per minute. Stroke volume is the volume, and it's usually measured in milliliters of blood your heart ejects in 1 stroke or 1 beat. Beats canceled out here, and we're left with milliliters per minute. Milliliters per minute. These, again, these numbers can go up and down depending on a multitude of factors. The average heart rate, we said, was 75 beats per minute. And the average stroke volume, we had somewhere around 70 mLs, is my recollection, and this number that came out to about 5,000 plus milliliters per minute. Again, this number can change depending on a number of factors. It can go up or it can go down. Up would be via sympathetic stimulation, down would be via parasympathetic inhibition. The other thing I mentioned with cardiac output is ideally to raise this number, what you would prefer is to have a bigger stroke volume. So a healthy heart, we said, was marked by the potential for a large stroke volume. The goal of any athlete is to be able to perform at a high level, yet to maintain a comfortable heart rate. In order to move the increased blood required by extreme exertion, if you're not bumping your heart rate, then you have to be bumping your stroke volume. Good luck.